In this video, I'll be providing an introduction to my Porsche 944, a summary of how I acquired it, and a breakdown of the maintenance and repair items completed during my first year of ownership, along with their associated costs. After shopping around for a couple years, I ended up finding this car on eBay in January of 2019. It's a 1988 model year in Zermatt silver metallic over black leather. I was mainly looking for a 944 that was either black or silver, in general running condition with a decent interior, but also had some opportunities as a project car. This one had been in storage for a period of 8 years before being revived by a used 944 parts dealer out of Maryland, and to get it going, the timing and balance shaft belts were replaced, along with the fuel pump, damper, regulator, engine mounts, rear axles, and some staggered D90 wheels from a 944 S2. The car had the added benefit of a clutch replacement at some point prior with a spring-centered clutch. The naturally aspirated 944s featured a rubber-centered clutch from the factory that are known to crumble with age, regardless of mileage or driving conditions, so it was nice to have that item off the list at least for a little while. The week following the auction's close, I took a one-way rental car to Maryland, paid for the car, and drove it 341 miles back to North Carolina. My initial plan for the car was to drive it a bit while slowly working on the backlog of deferred maintenance, cleaning and replacing items along the way to rejuvenate its overall condition. The car came with a few service records from the 90s and the early 2000s, which included a couple timing belt changes and a water pump replacement, most of which really wasn't relevant due to the car's lengthy storage period, but it was nice to have. With 168,000 miles on the odometer, I figured the prior owner would have put some other work into it to get it that far, but unfortunately, most of the rubber engine seals began to soon fail one after another. After giving the car a good once-over, I began to discover that various hardware was missing. The cooling fan assembly wasn't bolted in along the top, and the air filter housing was just bouncing around in the engine compartment. So I spent the early months replacing a lot of hardware and most of the fluids on the car, new engine oil, power steering fluid, and gear oil, while caring for some safety items along the way, such as new hood shocks, windshield wipers, headlights, and various side marker and brake light bulbs. The oil change cost just over $40 in supplies, and the gear oil work was right at $85, and that included 3 quarts of MTL, new drain plugs, and 2 differential output seals, a common area for leaks at the transaxle. The hood struts were $20, and the headlights cost around $37. The right side of the engine was pretty well greased up and actively leaking fluids, so I replaced the oil pressure sending unit that was cracked for $20 and rebuilt the leaking power steering pump with all new seals for $24. I replaced the power steering reservoir and flushed the system. There's a filter in the bottom of the reservoir that can't be replaced without swapping out the entire part, and given the dirty brown color of the fluid, it was good timing for that. The reservoir cost $35, and I threw on a new V-belt as well for $10. After about 2 months of ownership, the O2 sensor failed, resulting in a rough idle and a loss of power in the engine. I was able to remove the old sensor, but the threads were pretty well mangled, and I wasn't able to cleanly chase the threads, so I had a new bung welded to the exhaust pipe, and I eliminated the carbon monoxide sampling tube at the same time. This repair came in at $127. The car came with an aftermarket Bossel exhaust installed, inside which all the baffling had basically crumbled, and it sounded really bland and not at all like a Porsche. I was lucky enough to find an OEM muffler on Craigslist for $100 that was in great condition, so I got that mounted up and replaced a bunch of the exhaust hardware while I was down there, and the car sounded a lot better after that. Not long after, I began to work on some of the fuel system components, replacing the fuel filter for $22 and its outlet line for $50, along with the fuel tank strainer for $70, and I cleaned out the tank while I was in there. The old strainer was in pretty bad shape and ended up being fused to the metal mounting collar on the fuel tank, which separated during removal, so I had to epoxy the collar back into the fuel tank to mount the new strainer. The only other option would have been to replace the entire fuel tank, but it's been holding up well with no other issues at this time. At this point, spring had arrived in North Carolina and it was getting a little hot outside, and that's when I discovered that the HVAC system was stuck on heat only, so I replaced the connecting rod bearings and spring clips under the driver's side dash that actuate the heater control flap, as these had cracked and disconnected. Parts for this repair cost $15. After 6 months, the water pump gasket failed and dumped coolant all over the driveway, so I went ahead and replaced the water pump, the seal, the thermostat, and added in all new hardware. The mounting studs were decently frozen into the block and took a bit of work removing, so much that the second to last stud snapped off in the engine block. Fortunately, I was able to drill it out with a right angle drill and install a time cert to repair the threads there. While I was working here, I replaced the upper and lower balance shaft seals that were leaking, and I replaced the alternator ribbed belt. Cost for this repair came in at $266. About a week later, one of the cooling fans stopped working on me. When the engine reaches an operating temperature of 92 degrees, both of the cooling fans should kick on, so if you've got only one fan spinning, there is an issue. In this case, it was just a blown fuse, so I installed a 25 amp fuse at cooling fan number 1 to get it up and running, and that cost only $5. Not long after, I decided to replace the rubber fuel lines in the engine bay, going to the regulator and from the damper. The old lines weren't in terrible shape, but from a safety perspective, I wanted to go ahead and get it done. This job involved removal of the plastic fender well on the passenger side, cutting the hard lines, and fitting some Aeroquip lines that I purchased from Renbay. The Renbay kit used here cost $125. I probably should have replaced the front main seal when I did the work on the water pump, but I wanted to get the car back on the road at the time, and wouldn't you know, the car repaid me by developing a front main seal leak about 4 months later, so I took the opportunity to replace the front crankshaft seal and the oil pump drive gear, which requires removal of the crankshaft bolt. This bolt is torqued to 150 foot-pounds, and mine was nicely locked up, of course, so I ended up using a 5-foot cheater bar to break it loose. Parts for this repair came in at $90. Toward the end of the first year, the right rear of the car began to sag, which was an indication that the rear shocks had failed. I ended up replacing those with some Koni Sport adjustable units. These were available as a factory option at the time and provided some needed stiffness in the rear. This was also the largest single expense during the first year, coming in at $288, and that put the total mechanical repair costs at $1,787.48. In addition to these maintenance and mechanical repair items, I completed some work on the interior and exterior as well. As for the exterior, the first thing I did was remove the cracked and faded stone guards on the car that had turned black with age. There wasn't much vinyl left to these, basically just sun-baked adhesive, so I had to use a rubber eraser wheel to strip them clean. This job took almost 2 hours to complete, but only cost me $13. I spent another $145 on supplies to repair a quarter-size rust spot on the left rear rocker panel. My goal here was mainly to neutralize the rust and prevent further spread, and while it turned out okay, I plan to have it professionally repainted at some point in the future. I then installed some black stone guards on the rear fender flares that were modified pieces for a Porsche 930, cut to fit the space on the 944. The left and right window slot seals were dry and cracking as well, so I replaced those for a total cost of $120. And finally, I completed a number of smaller items like replacing the hatch lock seal, the tire valve stem caps, and touching up various rock chips on the paint. The exterior costs for year 1 totaled $384.32. For the interior of the car, I spent some time tightening up various panels, replacing missing screws, and applying protectant to the dashboard and leather seats. I also replaced the center console/cassette box hinge that had broken and replaced the inside cloth liner with some black vinyl for a total cost of $42. I also replaced the rubber pads on the brake and clutch pedals, along with the broken sun visor clips and the faded leather shift boot with all new parts, which totaled around $65. Interior repair costs for year 1 came in at a total of $128.60. In all, year 1 was pretty productive. I was able to clean up the car quite a bit, complete a number of critical maintenance repairs, and I ended up driving the car a distance of 1,305 miles during that time. Here's a breakdown of costs for the year. The initial vehicle cost was $5,500. Mechanical repairs came to $1,787, and the exterior and interior expenses were $384 and $128 respectively, for a total parts cost of just over $2,300, making the grand total for the year $7,800.40. I certainly had a lot of fun along the way, and there's a lot more planned for this car, but that concludes the review of the project log for year 1 on this 1988 Porsche 944.